Great. Well, welcome everyone. Glad you all can make it, even though it's a day of the Star Trek opening and some other exciting geek events. But we're in for a real treat today. We have Eric Hautemont, and that's really testing my high school French there, but I hope I said it right. He's the co-founder and CEO of board game publisher Days of Wonder. So let's give him a hand, first of all. So Eric and his co-founder, Mark Kaufman, started Days of Wonder in 2002, and they've just won a lot of awards, including a prestigious German Game of the Year award, again, which will test the limits of my European languages, so I won't try, but they won many other industry awards for their blockbuster title, Ticket to Ride. And they're one of the youngest companies to ever, win the prestigious German award. They also have a top-selling App Store game. And so in the world of the digital world of Silicon Valley, Eric and Mark have dared to go analog. And as you can tell, that's paid off pretty well. But actually, Eric is also from a background of technology. He was at companies like Ray Dream, which was a 3D Max software developer. And he was at Fractal Design before. And so here today, he'll give a talk and a Q&A, and he'll sort of talk about his path towards going from digital to analog while he decided to start a board game company. And then at the end, we'll actually have a chance to play board games with him. He has some Ticket to Ride boxes here. And so if you stick around towards the end, we'll have some fun. So let me, without further ado, let me introduce Eric to the stage.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It was kind of fun driving down Shoreline because I used to work about 2 blocks from here 20 years ago. So that brought back some good memories back in the digital days. But what I'd like to talk about today is something a bit different, and that's board games. And the reason why board games are different is they're different from any other form of entertainment and really any other form of consumer product you can think of. And they're different in a big way, but that takes a while, especially when you're coming from the digital side, like I did, to kind of like sink in. And the big difference is how long they last. To put some things in perspective, the best-selling board game today, in terms of number of units sold, if not profit, is still a game called Monopoly, which was the best-selling title back in 1935. Now, that's kind of like if Errol Flynn was making more money this year than Brad Pitt, or if Cole Porter was outselling Lady Gaga, which, needless to say, no one expects would happen, right? And what's interesting is if you look even at the packaged good business, you look at something like Campbell's Soup, for instance, and their packaged good business, their soup, has changed more as a product than as Monopoly. And that is one thing that gave us pause as we were starting the business, but that was one of the things that attracted us to that business. And the reason it attracted us to that business is because in another life, my partner and I used to run high-tech companies. I ran a 3D graphics company in the late 80s, early 90s called Ray Dream, which was doing 3D graphics software. And while that was fun and we learned a lot, one thing that I felt frustrated with is we sold that company to a company called Fractal Design, which had just gone public. And 2 years later, I was offered to buy back that company, which I had sold to them for over $50 million, for $1. And I politely declined, and I was right to decline because a friend of mine who bought it back for $1 lost his shirt. But what was frustrating about that was that while you can make money and learn things, there's very few companies, and Google is one of the exceptions, so I think you guys are lucky, that can really stand the test of time on the digital side. And so that's one thing that was very attractive to us about the board game business. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is that means the incumbents, the monopolies of the world, if they've been on top for the last 80 years, how are you going to displace them? Or how are you going to carve your own place in the sun in that market? And that's an interesting challenge. So when we started the company, we had a theory and we had a bet. The theory was that the main reason why those games can stand for so long at the top is not because they are the best game design out there. I mean, clearly, since Monopoly, game design has evolved a lot. You have games now like Settlers of Catan and Ticket to Ride that arguably are better from a plain game design standpoint. So how come Monopoly is still on top? Well, we think the reason for that is if we were to take people at random in this room or anywhere else in the world for that matter, and I was to invite some of you to my house to play a game, no matter what's the game, let's just assume it's a good game. we'll play together. 8 out of 10 of you, at least, if not more, will have a great time. And at the end of the evening, you'll say, that was great. Where can I go and buy this game? Now, I take the exact same sample of people, so exact same people, and I give you a copy of the same game we're playing that night in the shrink wrap. And I call you back in 6 months, and I ask you how you like the game. And a large number of you won't even have cracked the shrink wrap open. Okay? And so that was the theory. The theory was that while people enjoy playing board games, they don't like having to figure out how to play the game that much. Okay? The bet was that if that theory is true, then what really matters as a board game company is how can you get a large number of people to play the game correctly while getting them over that initial fear. And truth be told, what's interesting with games like Monopoly is that most people don't play the game right. And most people, when they go and buy a box of Monopoly, they buy it because they remember buying it as a kid and playing it as a kid, or not buying it as a kid, but playing it as a kid. And then truth be told, what they'll do is they'll open the box and they'll quickly browse through the rules. And they will still play it wrong, by the way. But which is a different issue, which is that great game designs, I think, are very tolerant to errors in the way you play them. So the interesting question then was that if that theory is true, how do you reach a large number of people and teach them the game? And we felt that doing digital versions of the games would be a great way to do that. And the bet we made was that maybe if we did digital versions of our board games right, we could develop a virtuous circle where the sales of the physical board games would drive downloads of the digital games, and the download of the digital games would drive the sales of the board game, and you'd have that happy loop that develops together. So the question then becomes, the only question that really matters as a board game company, even though you're dealing with real cardboard pieces like that, is how do you make sure that your digital version is as good as your board game version, your cardboard version. I think before we go into the challenges about designing the digital versions of the board games, one thing I'd like to highlight is some more differences between the digital side and the cardboard side. So what's interesting about the cardboard side is that it's relatively quick and cheap to develop. A typical board game today, I'd say you can go and put a real cardboard board game in the market for under $20,000, and you can develop that in a couple of months. It's kind of tough to do the same thing under the same budget and the same time frame with a digital game. So that's one thing that is in favor of the cardboard side. The other thing that is interesting about cardboard is that people develop this really unique, very strong emotional attachment to the game itself. So again, taking some examples, if you take a game box like this, even if you end up abandoning this game and not playing it for many years and putting it away in a corner, one day you're going to stumble upon it again. And you're going to go, gee, I want to clean my apartment. Let's throw this. And then you're going to keep it. And most of the time, when you get above the trash can, you're going to say, no, looks too good. I'm too attached to it. I have good memories to it. And you're putting it back. Or you're playing it again. Okay? Whereas if you have a digital version, there's, I think, much less of a hang-up to just pressing the delete button. So there's a unique emotional attachment. Now, the flip side of that, and the bad thing on the cardboard side, is you can imagine what happens when you're trying to ship hundreds of thousands of these boxes across the oceans with a small company, okay? That's kind of a pain. It's definitely harder than just publishing something on the Google Play Store or the App Store. The other thing is, in favor of the digital side, is the press tends to be a lot more excited and a lot more willing to talk about digital stuff than they are about traditional card games or board games. Okay, so that's a plus on the digital side. And these are the main differences that we see between the cardboard side and the digital side. Now let's talk about game design and where the challenges are. So the thing that is very particular about board games as a form of entertainment is that the rules you're dealing with have to be very simple. And the reason why those rules have to be simple is because you're playing with those rules in your head. Okay, so there's a minimum of upkeep you're willing to do, and if you try to do too much, it's just not going to be much fun. And so what that means is there's what I call nowhere to hide. There's no fancy graphics that can hide a bad game. If the interaction of your rule set with the players who are playing it is not fun, there's no fancy graphic that is going to save you. The flip side of that is that also means that when you design a digital prototype of the game, you can design it in text mode. That's what we did with the very first digital version of a game we had. We had a small card game we launched the company with called Gang of Four. And initially, we developed a very simple text-based version of that. And the minute we knew the thing that was going to work is when we started playing that multiplayer card game in text mode, because that was fun, even though it was in text mode. And so my point is, if you have a game that is fun with sucky graphics or in text mode, you know you have a real winner. Okay? So that's one thing that is really important to focus on. The next thing is that board games are fun because you're playing this simple set of rules against another human being. So yes, we can develop artificial intelligence opponents. And for some games, you can actually develop world-class AI that will beat the hell out of you. But that's not what is fun. What is really fun is interacting with other people and being able to compete mind against mind with all the weaknesses and luggage that comes with that. And that creates a set of interesting issues from a development standpoint. One of the interesting issues is the board games tend to be turn-based. So you would think, well, they're perfect asynchronous games. Well, except when you look at how people really play board games, they aren't exactly playing them asynchronously. Yes, they're taking their turns, but they're playing in one game session. You tend not to play over a bazillion different game sessions. And what we ended up discovering is that what people really, really want deep down, and sometimes they don't know how to express it, but what they really want with a digital board game is they want the best of both worlds. They want to be able to start a game asynchronously and to stop a game whenever they want, because they might not be face-to-face with the other online players. But at the same time, when they happen to be together, they want the game to perform like a real-time game. So that's create some difficulties. And I said the hurdle to develop a basic board game that people can enjoy as a multiplayer online game these days is quite significant as a result of those issues. So let's talk now about some of the specific design challenges that we see. One of the challenges is what kind of information do you display? When you have a real board game, you don't ask yourself, what am I displaying? If there's a stack of cards, there's a stack of cards. And everybody's looking at that stack of cards and gets the same information. Now, when you display that stack of cards on a computer screen or any electronic device, you don't have the same resolution. You don't have the same perception of depth that you have with the real deck of cards. So at what point do you start showing people that there's only a few cards left in the deck? And how do you display that information? Do you actually put a number that says there's only 3 cards left in the deck, Eric? Or how do you account for that? These are issues that are non-trivial. The other issue that is non-trivial is in the real world, you can deal with something that is quite large. Okay, so you take a game board like this, okay, and you lay 3D plastic trains on them, and the information really jumps at you. So when you're trying to connect, let's say, Vancouver to Atlanta, it's quite obvious on the map where those things are. When you're dealing with a screen, whether it's a tablet screen or even worse, if you're dealing with a small format phone screen, it's a lot harder to see that information. And it's a lot easier to miss some things. So you're tempted to do things that help prompt the user and say, okay, these are your objectives. Well, the problem is, in the real world, you don't have something that flashes on the board, these are your objectives, because everybody else would see it, right? And again, these kind of subtle design changes change the flavor of the game. So you have to be super careful when you implement the game and you decide what information to display. You have to really think through how that's going to impact the game. Another issue is that reality tends to be a lot more complex than it looks. So going back to our first game, Gang of Four, so it's a trick-taking game where you have 64 cards, you play with 4 players, each player has 16 cards, you're trying to get rid of your cards before the other players do. And there's this thing which gives the game its name, called the Gang of Four, where if you have a 4 of a kind, that acts as a trap, and that allows you to play on anyone's hand. And when we started programming that game, people complained, the game is broken. There's way too many Gang of Fours. And so, of course, if everybody has trumps in their hands, the game kind of breaks down. And so we looked at the code initially and we thinking, okay, maybe there's a bug somewhere. So we run some stats and we look at actual gameplays and so on. And the odds of having a Gang of Four are exactly what the map said it should. So we go, wait, there is no error in the way we program this. And then we realize the error is a human error that is actually built in the physical game itself, and that the game relies on in order to work, which is that when you play with a real deck of cards, you will not truly do, at least most humans, won't really truly do a random shuffle from one hand to the next. Okay? And if you do a true random shuffle, the game will break down. I guarantee you that. So if you guys play Gang of Four, don't shuffle it too much. Okay? What that means is we had to actually go back and program a riff-raff shuffle that kind of mimic the way you would poorly shuffle the deck, because otherwise the game does break down. So that's one example. There's another even more embarrassing and simpler example of reality being more complex than it looks, or deeper and richer than it looks, which is almost embarrassing to admit, which is linked to another game we have called Small World. And in Small World, it's kind of like a fantasy game of Risk, and you have a die. And that die you can roll on your last conquest to try to grab a territory. And that die has a feature that is a bit unique, which is that there's one side with 1 pip, one with 2, one with 3, and the other 3 sides happen to be blank. Okay, no big deal. When you play with the real game, you grab the die, it's immediately going to jump at you. I don't need to write anything in the rules that says, beware, this dice has 3 blank sides. Okay? Well, when we programmed the electronic version, we started getting lots of reviews, and on the App Store it's very frustrating because you can't leave feedback or answers to these people on their reviews saying, the game is cheating, I'm always rolling blanks. And we realized, well, yeah, it's rolling the die for you, and when it's rolling on the screen, you don't really ever get a chance to see it literally side by side. It kind of rolls too fast. It rolls like a real die, and you can't really know that there's 3 blank sides. So that's another example where you really need to be careful about how you handle the display of information, and how you translate the physical components into the digital side. One other challenge is the perception of time. When you're playing face-to-face, you have interaction, and that's true, by the way. It's not so much a digital versus cardboard issue here. It's an issue of playing face-to-face versus playing online against people that are on a remote connection. Which is that when you're playing face-to-face, there's so many human interaction that doesn't really pertain to the game itself that comes into play, that your perception of time is vastly different from what it is when you just focus looking on your screen. Okay? And what that means is in a game like Gang of Four, where you can play a hand or you can pass even if you could play that hand, and that information is crucial because it's giving me as your opponent a lot of information. If I see that you hesitate about passing, I know something about your hand that you don't want me to know. And what's happening is when you're just watching the screen, you have no one to look at. So you're missing that whole additional information, social information. And as a result of that, and we literally timed it and did the test, if you pause for even less than a half a second, we will notice, or the good players will notice. Okay? And that's something they would never notice in the real world. Okay? So that is a challenge, and that means that people will play the game differently, and you have to accept that there's some things you just won't be able to change, and people will play the game differently. Another example of that is because you have no one to look at and interact with directly, you will focus on what information you're presented with. So again, looking at that very simple card game, Gang of Four, it's a game where there's 4 players, but there's only one winner. And there's no second, third, fourth player. You're either the winner or you lost. And when you play the game online, all you get to see at is potentially an avatar, the name of that avatar, which usually don't change during the game itself, and a score. And as a result of that, you focus on the score a lot more than you would in the real world. In the real world, people will write everyone's names, they will write down the scores, and at the end of every couple of hands, people will go and say, okay, what is your score? What is your score? And that's kind of in the background of your mind, in the back of your mind, but it's not something that is facing you on the screen all the time. And as a result of that, what we've seen is competitive players who play online get into this meta game where the scoring information of all the partners is so present in their mind at the whole time that it alters the way they play the game and the strategies they use. Another unique challenge to the digital versions is that people have a hard time believing that AI doesn't cheat. Okay? A really hard time. So we have a game, it's a World War II game, it's called Memoir 44, and it's a game where you get to roll lots of die. And when you roll those dice, people are not willing to believe that the computer rolls the same dice you are. So people asked us, we said, I'm a programmer, I want to see your routine. So we showed the actual code. And then they say, I want to see records. So we published 500,000 game records. And we explained to these people, oh, by the way, the dice rolling function has no idea who it gives that information to. So the dice rolling function is exactly the same that is rolling the computer dice and your dice and doesn't know when it's giving the results. People still don't believe it. The reason why people don't believe it is very simple. It's a game that you play on the board and where the position of different pieces and so on has quite a bit of impact on the strategy. And that's something that is kind of expensive to compute and in some instances actually tough to compute on the computer. The flip side of that is with the computer, what you can really do much better than 99.9% of the human population is you can compute the odds. And you can compute the odds very well. So I'm rolling 8 dice and I'm looking for this symbol and that symbol, but not that one, versus 5 dice and I'm looking for that one and that one. The computer will do much better than a typical human. So as a result of that, when we program the AI, we say, well, let's use the computer strength and let's program it that way. So our AI got really good at maximizing its dice rolls. And that combined with the fact that the perception of time changes and that when you're playing in the computer, you see the dice rolls happen in a shorter or compressed period of times. Totally changes your perception, okay? And it's really, really tough. I mean, you can show people the actual evidence. It's basically, we've come to the conclusion it's impossible to convince people the AI isn't cheating, okay? The other interesting challenge with AIs is that sometimes the game looks simple to play. The rules are simple, like Ticket Ride. So you think, well, the AI should be easy to program. Well, not so. It can be very difficult. It can be like really difficult. And the flip side of that is there's games that look complex to play for humans, and the AI is actually quite simple to program. One thing that we like to do is we don't think it's that interesting to try to develop. It's challenging, and it's not that interesting usually to try to develop an AI that plays like a human does, because in that case, just go and find a friend. I mean, come on, it's not that difficult, especially if you can play online. So we try to take advantage of that. So with a game like Small World, for instance, we use the fact that the initial version of the game was only a 2-player game. And in the 2-player game, it's a zero-sum game. So whatever points I'm scoring, I'm taking away from you and vice versa. And as a result of that, we use that in the way we designed the AI, and people felt that the game was super aggressive. It was super aggressive because you'd put a stack of armies like that on one territory. And in the regular play, in the real world, people will never go after that stack. They literally physically intimated by the height of your stack. Even though all you need is one more token, okay? And it doesn't matter whether the stack is that high or that high from a score standpoint. And so we were able to develop something that played really fundamentally different. And that's kind of fun because what that shows is that when you're developing digital games the right way, they will allow you to learn the game, but they will scratch a different itch. So what you'll get as a player from playing the digital version of the game will be different, and the pleasure you'll get out of it, and the frustration you'll get out of it sometime too, will be different from the one when you're playing the cardboard. And that really helps make the game a success, the business a success, because then you really do get that feedback loop where people who play the physical board games are aware of the game and are interested in playing it online, and that creates a base level, if you want, of sales online that allows you to be visible and stay visible if you have a large number of physical players out there. And in turn, because you're visible in the charts, people can buy the online version. Some people will discover the game online, and eventually they'll want to go and buy the physical board game because the physical board game will give them different things. And one of the things that will be different is the memories that you get out of it. If you think about when you were playing board games, maybe as a child, I'm sure most of you can jog some memories of some specific games where you remember so-and-so did that at risk and captured that territory. And it's much harder, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much harder to have the same emotional connection with the digital side. So being able to play on both fronts is really, really something that we strive to do. And that's really, I think, that really captures what we try to do as a business. We really enjoy being one foot on the physical side, one foot on the digital side. That allows us to keep the business interesting because, frankly, the cardboard side, it's interesting initially because the perspective of time is so different and it impacts the way you drive and you develop your business. But after a while, you figured it out. Okay, so you understand how that fragmented, antiquated distribution network works. And it kind of gets boring. The nice thing on the digital side is things change so quickly that you always have to stay on your toes. And so being able to combine the two really makes for a fun lifestyle business. And I think that kind of sums up what I wanted to discuss about regarding the design of the games, and I'll be happy to open it to Q&A now.
So why don't you guys raise your hand, and I'll run by and put the mic in front of you so we can get it recorded.
The digital versions of your games are so good. I was just wondering how you guys made that pivot, or how you built up the team to start creating those.
So I think there's a couple of things that gave us an edge. One is that, and that goes back to the fact that people in the cardboard business will fail in a hurry. That's one of the things that for us makes it interesting, which is that there is no shortcut and you need to go slow. And we try to adopt the same thing with the digital side. So one of the nice things about the board game side is once you have, it's both the best and the worst business in the world, because it's like the book publishing business. Until you have a hit, it's a really, really bad business to be in. And I would recommend to no one interested in making money to go in the board game business, okay? Because it's expensive to manufacture, it's expensive to distribute, and it's low margins, okay? But that's only true until you get a hit. And then the day you get the next Ticket to Ride or the next Harry Potter in the book business, that becomes a wonderful business. Because once a year, you call your printer, you say, please, pretty please, print me some more money. There's very little competition, and it lasts forever. And it's true. I mean, we look at Ticket to Ride. So we came out with Ticket to Ride 10 years ago, and we've been selling more Ticket to Ride every single year of the board game, every single year, than the year before. And our marketing expenses are literally this much. As my partner and friend Mark likes to say, our marketing is in the game box. We put all the money in the box, and the word of mouth is what's going to do it. Now, the flip side of that is the word of mouth only goes so fast. So if you're in a hurry, you're just going to spend money and waste it. So I think the luxury of having those hits under our belt on the cardboard side has allowed us to go very slow on the digital side. Okay? So the first version of Ticket to Ride, the digital board game, was actually on the web back in 2005 as a small Java app. And initially it was free. And what we realized as people started playing it is that some people were playing it a lot. I mean a whole lot. like there's some people, I won't name names, but there's some people now that have played in excess of 80,000 games of Ticket to Ride online. Now, online it plays faster than a real board game, so if you're really fast and good, and by the time you're at your 80,000th game, you should be fast, at least, if not good, you'll be able to play in maybe 3 to 5 minutes if it's a two-player game. But I'll let you do the math. 80,000 times 3 to 5 minutes, that's still a pretty good chunk of time. So we realized that maybe there was a business for actually selling the digital versions. And what really I think allowed us to get to the next level was the apparition of the unveiling of the iPad. And where the iPad and all the tablets, it's not specific to the iPad, but where I think the tablets, and not the phones, but the tablets differ from every other form of device, is that they're the first devices that I think are really, or can in certain usage, be very transparent. Meaning that you can play on that device, and you don't realize, consciously or not, that you're sitting in front of an electronic device. When I'm sitting in front of a computer playing a game of Ticket to Ride, I know I'm intimately aware that I'm in front of my computer playing Ticket to Ride. When you're playing on the tablet, sometimes you can forget that. And it's especially true when you're playing face-to-face on the tablet. So the answer, I guess the long-winded answer to your question is, the reason we've been successful, I think, is we take our time. We don't hesitate to be late, so we have lots of people that come to us and they say, we have a new platform, you must do that. So a couple of years ago, we had people saying, oh, if you're not on social networks, you're dead. And we're like, maybe we're dead, maybe we're not. The nice thing is we can afford to wait. And if we miss, and same thing was true with consoles. We had people come in and say, you need to be on this console. Well, no, we don't really, actually, because we're doing just fine on the cardboard side without the digital side of the business. And so if we're not on that version, we can be on the next version or the next version. And by the way, if we miss the train, maybe that train will go off-road somewhere and we don't have to worry about it, and we'll save some time.
Hi. So I play Memoir 44, and after your comments about the AI, I was wondering if you've ever felt the urge to actually tweak the AI so that it cheats, but in favor of the player. Like a lot of video games do that. Like they make it seem like it's fair, but it's actually in favor of the player, so the player doesn't complain.
No, we don't for a couple of reasons. One is an economical reason, which is that we're a very small company actually in terms of people. We're 16 people worldwide, and that includes the people that do the physical cardboard stuff, and all the people who do the programming and the art for the online versions. So once we have a version that we're happy with, we try not to tinker with it too much because it's expensive. It's expensive not in terms of money, it's expensive in terms of our time. And whatever time we spend developing these additional tweaks to the AI is time that we don't spend taking the next game online. So that's one reason. The other one is that we actually think that part of the fun of doing AIs or of playing against AIs is figuring out the AI. It's almost like a puzzle. And once you've solved that puzzle, then frankly, we want to encourage people to go and play online. There's no way we could have the entire company work on AIs from MR44 for the next 10 years. And I still don't think we could duplicate the variety of opponents that are playing face-to-face.
A short follow-up. When can we expect Android versions of your games?
So I'll give an answer. But before I give that answer, I need to promise everyone that you're going to be able to keep your mouth shut for the next 2 weeks. So is that a yes? Okay. So we'll be shipping. And I know I've been kind of infamous in the board game industry because people, every time we ship a new version on an iPhone or something, people say Android, Android, Android. And I've actually gone to the press a couple of years ago on record and saying, we don't want to do Android versions, and here's why. And I got a lot of flack for that from board gamers. But we're actually coming with a Ticket to Ride version on Android tablets. And I say tablets, so they will work on some of the large. I mean, one thing that is interesting and kind of challenge for a small team like us on Android is that you have this wide variety. You have this continuum of form factors from like really tiny phones all the way to large tablets. But you'll be able to play Ticket to Ride on tablets. The game will ship on Google Play on May 30th. And if some of you are interested, you can send me an email after we are done. You can send me an email at Eric, that's ERIC, at Days of Wonder. And if you really can't wait until May 30th, we can probably get you to download the application we use to distribute beta version, which is called Hockey App, and send you an APK of the game ahead of time. The only thing we ask is, as a company, we tend to be quite secretive about what we do until the day we launch. So you're welcome to email me. I'll give you a version. Please don't try to go and post it on torrent or anything like that until May 30th.
So my daughter and I like to play Ticket to Ride, but I find when we play together, she's 8, we don't play this sort of cutthroat game of like, oh, I'm going to cut you off and you can't finish a route. But we kind of play it in a cooperative way where, oh, I see you're trying to build over here, I'll build over there. Have you thought about with some of your games, thinking about ways you can make them like cooperative variants of the games or cooperative gameplay so that for families and stuff, those kind of environments? Yeah,
so we actually have a game called Shadows of a Camelot, which is a game that is actually built around the whole idea of being cooperative, meaning that all the players together play against the game mechanics itself. Now, even there, I'm afraid, though, we couldn't quite help it. So we did put a small wrinkle in that, which is that even though all the players are playing together against the game mechanic itself, there is always the possibility or the risk, depending on your taste, that one of the players is a traitor and will win if everybody else loses. Okay, but you don't have a guarantee that that player is there. And if you want to play it in purely cooperative mode, you can do that. On a game like Ticket to Ride, there's a way to play cooperatively, like on the Asia map, for instance, we have a team version, so where players have a limited amount of information they can exchange or they can share together. So you're playing cooperatively, but you're still playing competitively against other players. And the reason for that is, again, with real board games, you must deal with a very simple set of rules. Otherwise, you lose the vast majority of players. And so it's difficult to keep the tension that makes a game fun and tight while going purely cooperative. So unless you design the game from the ground up for that, I think it's very difficult to take a game that is not a cooperative game and turn it into one.
I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the collaboration process between the company and board game designers, and sort of like how the work is split up.
Okay.
And also, I'm also curious about sort of like the origins of Ticket to Ride and how you got started creating that game.
Okay. So regarding how we work with game designers, it really runs the whole gamut. For a number of reasons, one of which is that we haven't met 2 game designers that are the same. There's actually very few people in the business who make a living full-time from game design. Most of those that do make a living full-time tend to be in the US, but there's game designers all around the world. And we've seen people that have submitted prototypes to us that were working for the Secret Service, that were working for the Coast Guards, or the equivalent of the Coast Guards in other countries, people that are teachers, people that are priests, all kind of people. And so depending on the work they do and the type of design they do, the amount of interactions we have is more or less significant. So we have some people that have worked to us and they say, I have a design, and the design was perfect from the get-go. And so the only interaction we had with them was signing a publishing agreement and then keeping them informed as we went to develop the game from a graphic design standpoint, if you want. One thing that we don't do is, and that goes back to the issue about collaboration, is I actually don't believe in design by committee. So when we do graphic design and things like that, we have an art director. We discuss together, we discuss in the company, but there's someone that makes the decision, and that someone is me, because I'm the one who is paying for this mistake if we screw up and we don't sell the board game as well as I thought we would. So we inform the game designers and we show them who we're going to work with and so on. But it's not really collaborative in that we don't let them decide which illustrator we're going to work with, or other things like that. Okay? Now, from a gameplay standpoint, depending on the game, it can be very interactive. So if we take a game like Memoir 44, Richard Borg, the author of that game, had designed a great game about sorry, my mind goes blank. He had designed a great game about the Civil War. And we went to him and we said, we'd like to do a game on World War II. And we spent the better part of 6 months working with him on the game design itself, tweaking the game design that he had to make it work for World War II. Okay? So it runs the whole gamut. Now, regarding Ticket Ride, the way we stumbled on Ticket Ride is we went to a small board game conference in Baltimore that is held every year, and now it's moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I think. It's called the World Board Game Championship. It's kind of a misnomer to call it the World Board Game Championship. We tend to think of it as the Baltimore Board Game Championship because 95% of the people there are in close proximity of that convention. But it's a great convention where people go and play games competitively for a week of time every summer. And we met with Alan there. We'd never met with him before. It was Mark and myself. And we sat down with Alan and he said, oh, I have this game that I need to show you. And he pulled a small cardboard box and it says station to station. And he put a map on the table that looked like a crude version of the original Ticket Ride map. And we started playing that game. He said, okay, so it's a very simple game. Here are the rules. And so we start playing 2 or 3 turns with Mark, and we look at each other and we're like, yes, this feels good. And suddenly Alan just wipes off the whole map clean and say, okay, so you understand how it plays. So you can take it home and decide. And with Mark, we just said like, you just stopped our game. You just destroyed our game. We were playing. What did you do? And to this day, I'm not quite sure whether Alan used that as a genius marketing trick to really make sure he had hooked us as a publisher or not. Now, Alan will claim, if you ask him in public, Alan will claim no recollection whatsoever of ever wiping that board clean. But that's kind of the background story behind Ticket Ride. And what was fun with that, and that's true of all board games, is that I then traveled with that little prototype. I actually flew to Korea because back in the day in 2004, there was kind of this board game craze in coffee shops in Korea, and I wanted to witness that firsthand. And so I traveled with that small prototype. And what I saw there, and I've seen it again and again with board games, is what's interesting is board games, if they're really good, they will work anywhere in the world. So no matter whether you speak the language of the people you play with or not, you can have a great time. And we saw that, landed in Korea, quickly was in a cafe where I had no clue what people were talking about. Okay, I couldn't understand a word, and they probably couldn't understand a word. You guys probably don't understand half of the words I've been talking about. And I called Mark and I say, you know, this game is going to be big. We knew right then. So that's one of the nice things about the prototypes is, again, even if you have really bad graphics, you'll know very quickly once you play with people whether you have a winner or not.
So first off, I wanted to thank you very much. I absolutely love Ticket to Ride. I actually bought a copy for my family back home in Chicago, and they've been playing it like every day for the past several months.
Thank you. Thank you, or sorry.
It's more of a thank you, actually. It helped me survive a few trips home, which is always nice. One thing I noticed in particular, because I played the tablet version a lot, is that when you play the tablet version, it tends to be more of a single-player experience, even when you're playing online, because your goal is to kind of to finish your routes. Where when you're playing in person, there's more of this competitive edge where you kind of want to screw people over and you want to cut them off, and you want to kind of see where they're trying to get to and cause more mayhem. Is there any way of kind of adding that into the digital version of the game, or I just found that that even though I play both copies and my strategy changes.
Yep.
From game to play.
What you say is very true. I think it's very tough on a game like Ticket to Ride, and the reason for that, and that's something that is shared with a lot of board game designs, is that there's hidden information. And so because you have that hidden information, it's very difficult for us to have a commercially practical version where you could play Ticket to Ride sharing the same tablet as your digital board with other people sitting across from you. Okay? And until we get that, so that means we have to assume then that everybody has a phone too that they can use to hold their hand, and then you have to deal with all these interface issues of, okay, again, the real world is complex, or it's simpler than it looks. So when you have real cards in your hand, you just drop your cards and you're done. If you have a digital device in your hand and you're trying to drop those cards onto the digital device in the middle, it gets quickly pretty awkward, and you have to worry about your Bluetooth connection or your Wi-Fi connection dropping off and all kind of crap that you don't have to worry about with a real deck of cards. Okay? So for games with hidden information like Ticket to Ride, I'd say it's very difficult until the technology gets a lot more transparent. Now with games like Small World, you can actually play a game of Small World face-to-face around the tablet, and in that case we actually see the behavior and the type of play very much being the same, with the kind of aggressiveness you describe and so on. What's interesting is we ran a Ticket to Ride tournament, championship tournament, real Ticket to Ride with the real board game. And because we have people that have played 80,000 games, we had lots of people online that think like they're the king of Ticket to Ride and nobody can beat them. So when we started doing national qualifications for that tournament, we had lots of people who said, I'm so good online, I'm not even going to go for the qualifiers. I'm just going to go in the actual competition and I'm going to crush everyone. And I'd say over 90% of people that had that kind of attitude got their clock clean when they actually played the real physical board game. Okay? Because it plays different. It really does. And we had a final where we had one person, it was interesting, we had a final where we had one person that had actually played a lot of physical board game versions of Ticket to Ride, and we had his opponent, who was the other semi-finalist, who is actually a professional player in that he didn't really particularly care at the time about Ticket to Ride. He cares about playing tournaments with money to win. And he studies the game, and he just goes after that. And so he had only played like 5 games of Ticket to Ride in real life, okay, and a couple of games online, but he studied all about the ticket distribution and everything else. And he finished second. So I guess experience does pay off, but it shows there's different styles. And to us, that's part of what's fun, is what you get out of playing online tends to be different from what you get out of playing the physical board game. And so eventually you end up buying both, which we love you for.
All right, we just have time for a couple more questions. There's one from VC, and then we're going to take one over here.
Okay.
So one from VC from Henry. He asks, given your emphasis on simplicity of design, how do you feel about the recent popularity of really complex games like Fantasy Flight, coming out of Fantasy Flight, like Civilization, Ora e Labora?
So I think it's interesting that the more complex games can be very exciting, and it's interesting you mentioned Civilization, because the old Avalon Hill Advanced Civilization is kind of the all-time favorite of mine, even though I would never publish it as a board game. I have memories of playing down the block literally for like 14 hours in a row, and that's some of my best memories. I think the difference between the long games and the simple games and the complex games is it goes back to the word of mouth. The word of mouth factor on the complex games is a lot harder to grow fast, and so you have a much smaller population. So you have people that become, I'd say, board game literate, And so you have people that actually, you have a small segment of the population that actually enjoys learning new games. And so when we go to like Alan Moon's Gathering of Friends, there are people who are there just to play new games. And if you propose to them to play a game they've already played, they're going to say, no, I actually want to play a new game. And so there's people that kind of enjoy that mental gymnastic, if you want. And once you get over the hump, I can see why people enjoy that, but that's a very small minority.
So this is a slightly different question, but you were talking about ensuring that the dice rolling in Memoir 44 and games like that was fair. So I was curious as to why the die in Small World has the 1 across from the 3 instead of having the 3 sides all across from blank faces, which would have a greater guarantee of having a fair die.
Actually, it's a good question. Because in the game itself, that difference, when you look at the impact of that difference, makes no difference. So we went with whatever was the simplest for the guy who actually did the Photoshop design to give to the tool manufacturer to do. So that's the actual reason why. We had a similar issue when we did that World Board Game Championship with Ticket to Ride. One of the 2 finalists came to me and said, okay, so I looked at the way the tournament rules work, and how are we going to decide who starts? It was the first person to play to win 2 games. Okay, and since there's no tie, within 3 games, you know what happens. And he's like, how are we going to decide who's going to start the first game? And I looked at the guy and I said, say what? And he said, yeah, there's an advantage to whoever starts first. And I said, well, yeah, there's a theoretical advantage. And the guy got like really, so we said, okay, fine. So I went to see the other finalists. I said, okay, so that guy wants to discuss who's going to start. And the other finalist looked at me and he said, that's okay, let him start. I'll just work a little bit harder. And then he proceeded to just crush him and he win 2 games in a row. So I guess that kind of sums up my view about those kind of things. They're kind of fun to think of from a math standpoint, from a practical standpoint. I'll give you a dice design that favors your odds anytime.
About the online versus offline gaming. So in the offline, one of the biggest, the thing that I enjoyed most is pitting people against each other, saying like, oh, he's leading, you should attack him, and so forth. And that like doesn't translate to online at all. And so I think I saw this implemented for Dominion, doing this over Google Hangouts, and letting people like see each other and then like sort of encouraging that interaction. What do you think about that? Could that be?
The only thing about that, the only reservation I have about those kind of things, and we kind of let people, that's why we don't implement them ourselves. We let people if they want, and we know there's some people sometimes that actually will literally open a chat channel and just like trash talk with each other during a game. The reason we don't support that directly in the game, besides the fact that it's work, that we'd rather spend on designing other games. So what I want to say is we're always leery of things that remove transparency. We think it's already such a challenge to translate a physical board game properly online that the more tools, the more technology you add, it's very difficult to do that in a way that is really transparent. So even though when I'm playing in real life, it's very easy for me to do some trash talk, if I have to go and actually type that, we think that's a big distraction, and that's not a very transparent way of communicating with people. And so that's the other reason why we don't care so much about those kind of things. We're really striving for having the technology not get in the way. I mean, that's one thing that is fascinating to us being in Silicon Valley is there's all these people, every 3 months, there's someone else that comes with a new dice design. And they go, look, there's this super duper electronic dice, and it's got a USB connection, and it's got a hard drive in it, and it does all these things. I'm like, dice have worked fine for thousands of years, okay? What's the point? And so we're trying, on the one hand, we look at new technology, and we're really curious to see what happens with Google Glasses in terms of certain type of hidden information that we think it could take care of during the games. At the same time, we're really careful to go slow and not do things that are non-transparent and really become more cumbersome and remove more than they add.
Let's give Eric a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks again for coming.